It was early autumn when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep in the woods of northern Montana. I had been working long hours at my job, and I needed time away from everything. Just me, my tent, and the wild. I had camped alone many times before, and I always found a strange comfort in being surrounded by nothing but trees, the distant sounds of wildlife, and the feeling of true isolation. I drove out on a Friday, making my way up an old logging road until I found a spot far enough from any main trails. I wanted true solitude. After parking my truck, I hiked about 2 miles deeper into the forest, carrying my gear. The air was crisp, and the leaves were just beginning to change, painting the trees in shades of orange and red. It was perfect. I set up my tent in a small clearing near a shallow stream. The place felt untouched, undisturbed. After gathering some wood, I built a fire, cooked a simple meal, and sat back, enjoying the sounds of the forest. As the sun set, the temperature dropped, and I wrapped myself in my jacket, staring into the fire. The night was quiet, too quiet. I had camped enough times to know the usual noises: crickets, rustling leaves, the distant calls of owls. But that night there was nothing, just silence. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the wind wasn't strong enough to shake the trees. Maybe I was just too far from any animals. Still, the quiet gnawed at me in a way I couldn't explain. I stayed up a little longer, letting the fire burn down, then crawled into my tent, zipped myself inside my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. I stayed still, listening, and then I heard it: footsteps. Not the light, erratic scurrying of a small animal. These were slow, deliberate steps, crunching softly against the forest floor. I held my breath, my heart pounding. The sound stopped. I waited, straining my ears, but all I heard was silence again. I told myself it was nothing. A deer, maybe. Coyote moving through the woods. I had a knife and a small hatchet with me. I wasn't defenseless. Still, sleep didn't come easy after that. Morning came, and with it, a sense of relief. The sunlight made the previous night's unease seem ridiculous. I checked around my campsite but didn't see anything unusual. I ate breakfast, packed a small bag, and decided to go on a short hike. I followed the stream for about an hour, admiring the scenery. The deeper I went, the more untouched the land felt. Eventually, I came across something that made my stomach tighten. A small campsite, but it wasn't like mine. There was no tent, no sleeping bag, just the remnants of an old fire pit, a few scattered items, a rusted can, some torn fabric, a boot half buried in the dirt. It looked abandoned but not ancient, a few months old at most. Something felt wrong about it. It was too close to my own campsite, yet I hadn't seen any signs of other campers. I turned back, moving faster than before, suddenly anxious to return to my site. The whole way back, I felt like I was being watched. The feeling was so strong that I stopped several times to look around, but I saw nothing. That night, the unease stayed with me. I built my fire bigger than before, as if the extra light would keep whatever was out there away. The forest remained quiet, too quiet. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. And then, sometime around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. I lay still, every muscle in my body tense. The steps circled my tent, slow and careful. I gripped my knife, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. And then, after what felt like hours, the steps retreated. They faded into the woods, swallowed by the silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At first light, I packed up my things. I didn't even make breakfast. I just wanted to get out. I moved quickly, my nerves on edge. When I reached my truck, I threw my gear in the back, started the engine, and drove away, only allowing myself to breathe once I hit the main road. I told myself I had imagined things, that there was a rational explanation. Maybe another camper had been in the area. Maybe it was a hunter passing through, but something about it didn't sit right. The way the footsteps had circled me, the silence in the forest, the abandoned campsite. I never went back to that part of the woods. I still go camping, but I always stick to well-known areas, places where I know other people will be nearby. Because that night, out there in the woods, I wasn't alone. And whoever or whatever was out there had been watching me. Winter camping had never been something I feared. If anything, I enjoyed it more than summer. No bugs, no crowds, and the cold had a way of keeping things silent. I liked the quiet. It made me feel at ease, far from the noise of the world. I had done it for years without issue, but last winter something changed. I had driven up to a remote spot in the mountains, far from any towns. It was a place I had visited before, a spot where the forest opened up just enough to set up camp without feeling too exposed. The land sloped downward, leading to a frozen stream about 50 yards from where I usually pitched my tent. Beyond that, the tree line thickened, and the woods stretched endlessly in every direction. The first day was simple. I set up my tent, gathered wood, and started a fire before the sun dipped too low. The cold had settled deep, the kind that cut through layers, but I was prepared. I had my heavy-duty sleeping bag, thermal gear, and a steady fire. Night fell quickly, as it does in winter. The sky was clear, stars spread thick above me. The fire crackled softly, and I sat there, eating my dinner in the glow of the flames. Everything felt calm, like it always did. At some point, I noticed a noise in the distance. It was faint, almost like a branch snapping, but the trees were bare, weighed down by frost and ice. Nothing should have been moving. I brushed it off. In the wilderness, sound carried oddly. Maybe it was ice breaking or the wind shifting something loose. I let it go. The fire burned low as I climbed into my tent, zipping myself into the heavy sleeping bag. The cold bit at my nose, but it was manageable. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind move through the trees. Then something else. A soft crunch. Footsteps. They were distant at first, slow, measured. Someone or something was moving through the snow. I held my breath, ears straining. Could have been an animal, maybe a deer, but the sound was deliberate, careful. It wasn't the skittering of a fox or the weightless hop of a rabbit. This was different. I waited, heart thudding slow but heavy in my chest. The sound moved closer, then stopped. Silence stretched, thick and unbroken. I turned onto my side, barely daring to move, listening for any hint of movement. Nothing. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound became something more in my head. Every shift of the wind, every creak of the trees. But nothing else happened. When dawn finally broke, the first thing I did was check outside. Fresh tracks led from the tree line to the edge of my camp. Deep prints pressed hard into the snow. They weren't animal tracks. They were human. I scanned the area, following the prints with my eyes. They circled my tent, stopping just a few feet from where I had been sleeping. Then they turned back toward the trees. Whoever it was had stood there for a while, watching, listening. A coldness settled in my stomach, different from the winter air. I was miles from anyone, or at least I had thought I was. No roads, no cabins, no signs of other people. Yet someone had been there in the dark, walking around my campsite. I packed up that morning, faster than I ever had before. I had planned to stay another night, maybe even two, but something about those footprints made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched. Not just that night, but maybe even before I had noticed. As I was packing, I checked my gear, making sure nothing had been taken or tampered with. Everything was exactly as I had left it. That was almost worse. Whoever had been there hadn't come for my supplies. They hadn't tried to steal anything. They had just watched. I started heading back toward my truck, moving quickly, my breath fogging in the morning air. The hike back should have taken about 2 hours. I made it in less than one. When I reached my truck, I threw my gear into the back and locked the doors the second I climbed in. The engine rumbled to life, the heater blasting weak warmth into the cab. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, looking out at the forest. Then I saw them, far off, just at the edge of the trees. A figure standing still, too far to make out any details, but close enough that I knew they were looking at me. I didn't wait. I put the truck in gear and started down the trail, glancing in the rearview mirror as I drove. The figure didn't move. They just stood there watching. I never went back to that spot. For weeks after, I felt uneasy. Every time I was alone, I felt like someone was there, just out of sight. I started locking my doors more often. I double-checked my windows. Every little noise in the night made me sit up in bed, waiting, listening. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted, but I do know that they didn't want to be seen, and that unsettles me more than anything else. I took a deep breath as I tightened the straps on my backpack. The weight of it pressed into my shoulders, but it was a familiar feeling, something I had gotten used to over the years. Camping alone had become a routine for me. It was my way of escaping everything: work, the noise of the city, the never-ending distractions of modern life. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, it was just me and the trees, the fresh air, and the sound of leaves crunching beneath my boots. I had picked this place for a reason. It was remote, deep in a forest where few people ever ventured. There were no designated camping areas, no trails leading to neatly placed fire pits, just pure wilderness. I liked it that way. It meant I could be alone. The hike had been long, nearly 6 hours of walking through dense forest, stepping over fallen logs, crossing shallow creeks, and making my way through thick undergrowth. But now, as the sun began to set behind the trees, I had finally reached the spot I had in mind. A small clearing next to a calm, still lake. I set my backpack down and stretched my arms. My body ached from the hike, but the cool evening air felt nice against my skin. I wasted no time in setting up camp. First, I pitched my tent. It was small but sturdy, just enough space for me and my gear. Then I gathered wood for a fire. The forest was damp from the recent rain, but I managed to find enough dry branches to get a small fire going. As the flames crackled, I sat on a fallen log and took in the silence. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that only existed in places untouched by people. The lake reflected the darkening sky, and the only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. I ate a simple meal, just some jerky and a granola bar, then washed it down with water from my canteen. The exhaustion from the hike was catching up to me, so I decided to turn in early. I zipped up the tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and settled in. The forest outside was completely dark now, but I had done this enough times to feel comfortable. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant hoot of an owl. Then, somewhere in the distance, I heard something, a snap. It was faint, barely noticeable, but in a place as quiet as this, even the smallest sound stood out. My eyes opened. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, probably just an animal. A deer, maybe. I had seen tracks on the way up. I let out a slow breath and closed my eyes again. Another snap, this time closer. I sat up. My heart was beating a little faster now. I listened again, straining my ears. The fire outside had burned low, but there was still enough light to cast a dim glow around the campsite. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The trees stood still, their dark silhouettes motionless against the night sky. I swept the flashlight across the clearing, but nothing moved. Just the forest. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch had fallen somewhere in the distance. Maybe a small animal was moving through the undergrowth. There were plenty of explanations. I zipped the tent back up and lay down again. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I woke up to another sound. This time it wasn't a snap. It was something softer, a rustling, close, right outside my tent. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen. I could hear it clearly now. Slow, deliberate movements, footsteps. Someone was out there. I barely breathed as I reached for my knife. My hand wrapped around the handle, my grip tightening. The footsteps stopped. Then the zipper of my tent moved. Not much, just the faintest shift. I bolted upright, grabbing the zipper from inside and yanking it up in one quick motion. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I pointed it out. Nothing. The clearing was empty. The fire was almost out, just a faint glow of embers. The trees stood tall, unmoving, but something felt wrong. I slowly stepped out, my knife still in my grip. My breath came in short, quick bursts as I scanned the area. That's when I saw them. Footprints, fresh ones, in the dirt just outside my tent. Not mine. Someone had been standing there, watching. A cold chill ran through my entire body. I swung the flashlight in every direction, searching for any sign of movement. The forest beyond my camp was a wall of darkness. Whoever it was, they were gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the dying fire, my knife in one hand, my flashlight in the other. Every sound, every whisper of wind through the trees set me on edge. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I packed up my gear. I wasn't staying here another night. I had just finished rolling up my sleeping bag when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The footprints. They weren't just in front of my tent. They were all around it, circling. My hands shook as I shoved the last of my gear into my pack. I needed to get out of here. I started down the same path I had come in on, moving quickly, my eyes darting to every shadow between the trees. The whole time I felt watched, like whoever had been out there was still there, still following.
Ivalkiet fast.
Then I started jogging, then running. 6 hours back to my truck, and I didn't stop once. When I finally reached the dirt road where my truck was parked, I threw my gear in the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The second the engine roared to life, I floored it. I didn't stop until I was miles away. Even now, I don't know who it was. A hunter? A local? Someone who had been living out there? Or something worse? All I know is this: when I go camping now, I don't go alone. And I don't sleep in a tent anymore. I had been planning a solo camping trip for months. It had been years since I'd gone out into the woods alone, and I wanted to push myself again. The last time had been in my early 20s, back when I had fewer worries and more confidence in my ability to handle anything. Now, in my late 30s, I needed to prove to myself that I could still do it. I wanted the silence, the space, the complete break from everything. I picked a national forest in Montana, well off the beaten path. I chose a spot about 10 miles from the nearest road, a remote, rugged area where I wouldn't have to deal with crowds. I didn't want any campsites, any picnic tables, any of that. Just me, my tent, and the wilderness. The drive took most of the day, winding through empty roads until I reached the trailhead. I parked my truck in a small clearing, checked my gear, and started hiking. The trail was narrow and steep, barely a trail at all. It was mid-September, the air cool but not cold. The trees were beginning to change, their leaves flickering gold in the late afternoon light. It took me about 4 hours to get to my spot, a flat patch of land near a slow-moving creek. It was perfect, far enough from the water that I wouldn't have to worry about flooding, but close enough that I had an easy source for drinking water. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. As the sun set, the forest around me grew dark, and the quiet settled in. The kind of quiet you only get deep in the woods, where there's no distant hum of traffic, no voices, nothing but the occasional rustle of leaves or crack of a branch. I felt good. I felt like I had done everything right. The first night was uneventful. I slept well, waking only once when I thought I heard something moving outside my tent. Probably just a deer. I wasn't worried. I'd camped enough times to know how sounds carry in the woods. The second day, I spent most of my time exploring the area. I followed the creek for a while, climbed a ridge to get a better view of the landscape. The forest stretched on forever in every direction, untouched and endless. I didn't see a single soul. That's what I wanted. That evening, as I was gathering wood for my fire, I found something odd. A boot, old, weathered, torn open at the side, just sitting there near the base of a tree. No other signs of anyone around. No campsite, no gear, nothing. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe some hunter lost it years ago. Still, it put me on edge. That night, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't just a sound. Something had touched my tent. A light drag, like fingers or the edge of a branch brushing against the fabric. My heart pounded as I reached for my knife. I listened, holding my breath. The sound didn't come again. I told myself it was the wind. The third day, I considered packing up. Not because I was scared exactly, but because I had this feeling. A weight in my gut telling me something was off. But I had planned for 4 nights, and I wasn't about to cut my trip short over some old boot and a noise in the dark. I forced myself to stay busy. I fished in the creek, made a small lean-to just for the fun of it, gathered more wood than I needed. Anything to keep my mind occupied. But as the sun started to dip below the trees, that feeling came back. I decided to keep my fire going all night. Normally, I'd let it die down, but I wanted the light. I sat up late, staring into the flames, listening. Then I heard it. Not close, but not far either. A sound I couldn't place. Not an animal, not the wind. A deliberate sound, like something moving carefully through the brush. Stalking. I told myself it was nothing. I forced myself to lie down in my tent, knife within reach. My fire crackled outside, casting shadows against the thin fabric of my tent walls. And then, just as I was drifting off, something moved, right outside my tent. Close, too close. I sat up, gripping my knife. My breathing was too loud, my heartbeat slamming in my chest. I waited, listening. The sound of footsteps, slow, purposeful. I didn't move, didn't even blink. The steps circled my tent once, then again, and then nothing. Silence. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping that knife until my fingers went numb. When the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I unzipped my tent and stepped out, every muscle in my body tense. The ground around my tent was disturbed. Footprints.
Bare footprints.
Human. I packed up in minutes, shoving everything into my bag without care. I didn't eat, didn't rest. I just started hiking, moving fast, not looking back. The whole way I felt it, that feeling of being watched. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I threw my gear in the back, jumped into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. Only then did I let myself breathe. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw something in the trees. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line, watching me leave. I didn't stop. I didn't look back again. I never went camping alone again. never thought much about camping. It wasn't something I ever went out of my way to do, but I had done it enough times in my life to not be completely unfamiliar with it. Growing up, my dad took me and my brother on trips every now and then. Nothing too serious, just a tent, a fire, and a few nights under the stars. It was always peaceful, quiet. That was before I became a cop. By the time I hit my late 30s, I had been with the force for over 15 years. The job changed the way I looked at everything. I didn't see the world as peaceful anymore. I saw it for what it really was: messy, violent, and unpredictable. I had been on enough crime scenes and seen enough dead bodies to know that bad things happened everywhere, even in the middle of nowhere. That's what made this trip different. I wasn't going out there for fun. I wasn't going out there to get away from the city or to enjoy the fresh air. I was going because of a murder. It started with a case, a routine missing persons report. A man named Thomas Lynch had vanished while camping in a remote part of the state. His family said he was an experienced outdoorsman, someone who knew how to handle himself. But he had been gone for over a week, and no one had heard from him. When we started looking into it, we found something strange. Thomas wasn't alone when he went missing. His friend, a guy named Eric Foster, had gone with him. But when search teams found Eric, he was dead, stabbed, dumped in a shallow grave near their campsite. That changed everything. It wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was a homicide. That's how I ended up out there, in the middle of nowhere, setting up camp near the crime scene with nothing but my truck, a tent, and a gun. My partner, Ray, was supposed to meet me the next morning. The plan was simple: spend the night at the site, look around in daylight, and try to figure out what happened. I knew it wasn't a good idea to be out there alone, but I didn't have much of a choice. The department was stretched thin, and we couldn't afford to waste time. So, there I was, setting up my tent in the exact spot where Thomas and Eric had camped. The sun was already low, sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. The place was dead silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just me and the sound of my own breathing. I walked around for a while, taking in the scene. The search teams had cleared out, but I could still see the signs of their work. Trampled grass, marked trees, the disturbed patch of dirt where Eric's body had been found. It was unsettling. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. The report said Eric was stabbed, but there was no mention of a struggle. No defensive wounds, no signs of a fight. That didn't make sense. If someone attacked him, he should have fought back, unless he never saw it coming. The tent was still there, abandoned and untouched. Inside, I found their gear, their supplies. Everything was still packed neatly. Their food hadn't been eaten. Their water was still full. It was like they had just arrived and never got the chance to settle in. That was the first thing that made me nervous. The second thing was the footprints. I had seen enough crime scenes to recognize them. Most of them belonged to the search teams, heavy boots pressing into the soft dirt. But there was something else, something I couldn't shake. A second set of footprints, smaller, lighter. They weren't from Eric. They weren't from Thomas. They were fresh. Someone else had been here. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a hiker passing through, maybe someone from the search team had come back. But I knew better. I could feel it in my gut. I walked back to my truck, locked everything up, and checked my gun. I wasn't taking any chances. The night came fast, and with it, the quiet. I sat by the fire, listening, waiting. Every little sound put me on edge. The crackle of burning wood, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional rustle of branches in the darkness. Hours passed, and nothing happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, just past midnight, I heard it. A twig snapped. Close. Too close. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just sat there, staring into the trees, listening. Another step. Slow, deliberate. Someone was out there. I reached for my gun, keeping it low, keeping it ready. More movement, a shadow in the darkness. I stood up, shining my flashlight toward the trees. The beam cut through the night, landing on something just beyond the edge of the campsite. Nothing, just trees empty and still. Then I saw it, a figure half hidden behind a tree, just standing there, watching. I raised my gun. My voice was steady, calm, the way they trained us to be. No response, no movement. I stepped forward, keeping my light on them. My heart was hammering in my chest. I knew this wasn't a lost hiker. This wasn't someone who had wandered too far from the trail. This was someone who didn't want to be seen. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. No sound, no trace, just gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything. But the forest was quiet again, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, gun in hand, waiting. By morning, I found the footprints, fresh, deep, leading away from the camp, disappearing into the trees. Ray arrived a few hours later. I told him what happened, showed him the tracks. He didn't say anything, just nodded. We followed them for miles. They led us deep into the woods, further than we expected. And that's where we found him, Thomas Lynch, or what was left of him. His body was torn apart, hidden under a pile of branches, like someone had tried to cover it up. But it wasn't just the body that got to me. It was what we found next. A knife buried in the dirt, stained with blood, and next to it a badge, an old police badge, rusted and worn. Not from our department, from somewhere else. Someone had been out there watching, waiting. Maybe it was another cop. Maybe it was someone pretending to be one. Whoever it was, they were still out there, and they knew we were looking for them. It was late October, and the rain had been falling since the afternoon. I was deep in the Peak District, far from any towns or houses, camping alone. The forecast had mentioned rain, but I hadn't expected it to be this relentless. The sky had been dark all day, a thick layer of gray clouds stretching endlessly overhead, pressing down like a weight. The wind wasn't strong, but the cold had crept in as soon as the sun dipped behind the hills. I had set up camp near a small patch of trees, not too deep in the woods, but far enough from the main hiking paths. I wasn't new to camping, but I preferred solitude, which meant I always chose the most isolated spots. The ground was damp, and the air smelled of wet leaves and earth. My tent was a small one, just enough to keep me dry, with a sleeping bag and a small camping stove inside. I had picked this location because it was far from roads, and I hadn't seen another person all day. By the time it got dark, the rain was still coming down in waves, tapping against the tent fabric, sometimes soft, sometimes hard. I had eaten earlier and was lying on my back, listening to the sounds of the rain and the distant rustling of trees. There were no animals making noise, just the occasional shift of branches in the wind. The air was thick with moisture, and inside the tent it was starting to feel stuffy. I shifted onto my side, adjusting my sleeping bag, when I heard something outside. A single, deliberate step. Not an animal scurrying, not the wind moving branches. This was weight pressing into wet earth. I held my breath. The rain continued, masking most sounds, but that single step had been close. Too close. I stayed completely still, straining my ears, but there was nothing for a moment. Just rain and the occasional gust of wind through the trees. Then, another step. I reached for the small flashlight I had next to me, but I didn't turn it on. The tent was zipped shut, and I hadn't left any food outside that could attract animals. I didn't want to make any noise, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. Another step, slower this time. Whoever it was, they were right outside. I stared at the thin fabric of the tent, waiting to see a shadow move against it. The rain made it hard to tell, but I thought I saw something, just a faint distortion in the darkness, a movement that wasn't just the wind. I waited, then silence. The seconds dragged on. My hand was gripping the flashlight so tight my fingers ached. I didn't hear any more steps, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The rain pounded against the tent, masking any quiet sounds, making it impossible to know if whoever or whatever was still there. I didn't move for a long time. My breathing was shallow, and my muscles were tense. Eventually, after what felt like hours, exhaustion took over, and my body forced me to close my eyes. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up suddenly to the sound of something brushing against the tent. A dragging sound, slow and deliberate. My body went cold. I had no idea what time it was, but the rain hadn't stopped. The air inside the tent was damp and heavy. I listened, waiting. The dragging sound stopped. Then, another slow step. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. If I was being watched, if someone was out there, I had to do something. Slowly, I reached for the zipper of the tent. My fingers felt stiff as I gripped the small metal pull. I took a deep breath and yanked it down. The cold air rushed in as I pushed the tent flap open, shining my flashlight out into the night. The rain made it difficult to see far, but the beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the wet ground and the trees beyond. Nothing moved. I scanned the area, my breath coming out in quick, shaky bursts. The rain splattered against the leaves and the tent, but there was no sign of anything unusual. The ground outside was soft and muddy, and I could see footprints, deep human footprints, leading away from my tent and into the trees. I knew I wasn't alone out here. I grabbed my pack, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no way I was staying until morning. I packed as quickly as I could, my hands fumbling with the straps in my rush. My mind was racing. Had they been watching me all night? Had they been waiting for me to come out? I slung my pack over my shoulders, zipped up my jacket, and grabbed my flashlight, keeping it pointed toward the trees. The footprints disappeared into the darkness, but I wasn't going to follow them. I was heading in the opposite direction, back toward the road. I moved quickly, my boots sinking into the wet ground, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The rain kept falling, and the wind had picked up slightly, making the branches creak overhead. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure following me, but I never did. It took me nearly an hour to reach the road. By then, my clothes were soaked, and my legs ached from the uneven terrain. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. I threw my pack into the back, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, just breathing. I never saw who it was. I never heard anything after I left. But those footprints were real. The sounds outside my tent were real. Someone had been out there, standing just a few feet from me, in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night. I haven't been camping alone since. It was supposed to be a simple business trip, a meeting out in the woods, a weekend of networking, and a little forced camaraderie with my boss and a few others from work. It wasn't my idea, and I didn't want to go. But when your boss tells you to show up, you don't say no. We drove out early Friday morning, leaving the city behind and watching as highways turned to smaller roads, and smaller roads turned into dirt trails winding through thick forest. The location was remote, too remote for my liking. My boss, Mark, had picked it himself. He had a thing for these kinds of trips, saying they built character. He liked being in charge, making us uncomfortable, testing us in ways that had nothing to do with our jobs. The plan was to camp for 2 nights, hold a few informal business discussions, and then pack up on Sunday morning. Mark had rented a few cabins deep in the woods, far from any town or cell signal. There were 6 of us in total: Mark, me, and 4 others from the company. I barely knew some of them, but we were all stuck together for the weekend. The first sign that something was off came when we arrived. The cabins looked old, worn down, like no one had stayed in them for years. The wood was damp, the windows clouded with grime, and the air inside smelled stale. They weren't the cozy kind of cabins you see in vacation ads. They felt abandoned. Still, we unpacked, set up the meeting area outside, and tried to settle in. The first night was uneventful. It rained a little, the fire smoked more than it burned, and Mark made us all sit around and talk about company goals while we forced down cheap beer. But the second night was different. I woke up around midnight, needing to use the bathroom. There was no indoor plumbing, just an outhouse a short walk away from the cabins. I stepped outside into the cold night air, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The woods were silent, unnaturally so. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the distant call of an animal. As I walked, I had the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I stopped, turned my light toward the trees, but saw nothing. Just shadows, just empty space. I hurried back to my cabin, locking the door behind me. I barely slept after that. In the morning, I noticed something strange. One of the folding chairs we had left by the fire was missing. At first, I thought maybe someone had put it away, but after asking around, no one had touched it. That wasn't the only thing. One of our food containers had been opened. We assumed it was an animal, but there were no bite marks, no mess. Just the lid neatly removed and placed beside it. We tried to brush it off, but I could tell I wasn't the only one feeling uneasy. Then later that day, I found footprints, not ours. They were fresh, leading from the woods toward our cabins and then disappearing back into the trees. They weren't animal tracks. They were from boots. Someone had been here. Someone had walked right up to where we were sleeping, right up to where we had been sitting the night before. Mark laughed it off. He said it was probably from a hiker, but we were miles from any trails. There was no reason for anyone to be out here. That night, I barely left my cabin. I locked the door, lay in my sleeping bag, and listened. Then, at some point in the middle of the night, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching over the leaves just outside. I held my breath. They stopped right outside my door. Then silence. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. And then, just as suddenly as they had come, they were gone. In the morning, we packed up and left. Mark tried to downplay it, but I could tell he was shaken too. None of us talked much on the drive back. A few days later, I looked up the area where we had stayed. I found an old news article. Years ago, someone had been living out there, illegally squatting in the woods. He had been caught breaking into cabins, stealing supplies, watching campers from the trees. They had arrested him, but he was released a few years ago, and no one knew where he went after that.